light spilled softly over the valley, brushing the garden with a gold that shimmered like a fragile dream. Diep stood among the rows of green, her fingers grazing the leaves wet with dew. The earth was cold, but alive, whispering to her in the only language it knew, that of survival. For her, tending to the garden was more than a habit, it was the pulse of her new life, a life given by him, James. The man who had lifted her out of the mud, out of the shame of a past she could never forget. She breathed in the cold air and exhaled gratitude, though somewhere deep in her chest, something heavier stirred. The silence around her was comforting but deceiving. She had begun to feel that lately, the quiet had a way of holding secrets, like the calm sea hiding a current beneath. James was kind, attentive, and gentle in ways that still made her uneasy. She didn't believe kindness came without cost. Not after what life had already taken from her. Yet every time she looked at him, she wanted to believe again. She wanted to think that some people could love without wanting to own. Far away, in a high-ceilinged office where glass walls reflected the gray of the city, an old man tapped his fingers against a mahogany desk. The sound was soft but sharp, like a knife's rhythm. "Keep watching him," he said without lifting his eyes. The man across from him, a shadow in a black coat, nodded. "Yes, sir. Your son has been spending more and more time at the countryside property with her." The old man's brows furrowed slightly. His tone was cold. "Her? A woman named Tu Diep. Works on his farm. Lives there." The old man leaned back, his voice low. "Find out everything." The message spread like smoke. A few days later, Diep noticed it, a strange stillness beyond the fence, the soft snap of a twig when no one should be there. At first, she thought it was the wind, or maybe a stray dog, but then it came again. The feeling of being watched, of someone's eyes on her back while she watered the crops. She turned quickly, but only the garden stared back. The fear was subtle, a slow crawl beneath her skin, something she refused to feed. After all, she had learned long ago that fear only gave power to those who caused it. That evening, James returned. The headlights cut through the fog, and she saw his familiar silhouette step out of the car. He smiled when he saw her, a tired smile that still carried warmth. "You've been working late again," she said softly. "I like seeing you here," he replied. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something she wouldn't say. "You've done well with the garden." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, the hills swallowed the sun, and the shadows lengthened, as though the world itself was listening. At dinner, the air between them was gentle, but under the candlelight, Diep could sense his distraction. His phone lit up more than once, his gaze shifting, unreadable. "Business?" she asked. "Just some company matters," he said, his tone too light to be true. In truth, he had met Ling earlier that day, his secretary, who had been pressing him about a new business deal. She had mentioned expanding into dried fruit production, something she claimed could bring the company great profit. But the real weight of that conversation wasn't the numbers, it was Ling's gaze. It lingered too long, too soft, as if she wanted more than his attention. Ling had also asked about Diep, in a tone wrapped with politeness but lined with curiosity. "She's different," Ling had said, sipping her coffee. "Strong, quiet. But do you really know her, James?" He hadn't replied then, only smiled faintly. But the question followed him home like a ghost. The next morning, the peace of the farm shattered. A black car parked discreetly down the dirt road, its windows tinted. Inside sat a man with a camera. He took photos, James helping Diep carry a basket of oranges, James brushing a leaf from her hair, Jamie's laughing. Every gesture captured like evidence. The man sent the pictures to a private number. Within an hour, James's father had them. He studied each frame, his face unreadable. The older man had seen enough of the world to know what affection looked like. But affection between classes, between power and the powerless, was never pure. Back on the farm, Diep worked restlessly. She tried to bury her thoughts under the rhythm of her tasks. The orange trees were heavy with fruit, bright and fragrant against the gray of the sky. She decided to pick some and sell them at the village market, a small act of independence she still clung to. James didn't stop her. He even smiled when she told him. "I'll help you," he said, and though she refused at first, he insisted. That was how they ended up side by side the next morning, standing in the market, their hands stained with citrus and laughter mixing with the sound of bargaining voices. But hidden eyes saw everything. The man in the car followed them, snapping more photos. Later, in another city, Ling received a message, an anonymous one. It contained those same pictures. Her heart twisted as she scrolled through them, jealousy rising like smoke in her chest. She didn't know why it bothered her so much. She told herself it was because of professionalism, because James was her boss, and such involvement could ruin reputations. But deep down, she knew it was something else, something she didn't want to name. That night, Deep sat by the small fire behind the farmhouse. The air was cold, biting, the stars scattered like shards of glass. She looked at the scarf she was knitting, thin and uneven. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She wanted to give it to James, a simple gift for the man who had given her a new life. But before she could finish, the crunch of gravel broke the silence. She turned, startled, only to see a man she didn't recognize walking toward her. He was well-dressed, though his shoes carried the dust of the road. "Miss Deep?" he asked politely. "Yes?" she replied cautiously. "I'm a friend of Mr. James. I came to ask you something personal." Her pulse quickened. "About what?" "About your past." The words fell like stones. She hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "There's nothing much to tell." He smiled, too calmly. "I think there is." So she told him, not everything, but enough. About the uncle who sold her for 2 buffalo, about the nights she spent wishing for a sky without chains. About how James had found her, half-starved, and taken her away from that life. Her voice trembled, but not from shame, from the effort of remembering. When she finished, the man nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, and walked away. But as he disappeared into the darkness, Deep realized she had never asked his name. 2 days later, James received a call. "You're making a mistake," his father's voice boomed through the line. "That woman, she's not who you think she is." James's hand clenched around the phone. "You had someone spy on me?" "I had someone protect you," the old man replied coldly. "Love blinds, son. Don't let it destroy you." That night, the argument echoed even after the call ended. James sat in his car, staring out at the empty fields. The moon hung low, the fog swallowing the road ahead. He thought of Deep's eyes, honest, unguarded, and something inside him refused to believe his father's words. Yet doubt, once planted, had a way of growing. When he returned home, Deep was still awake, mending a torn basket by the fire. She looked up, sensing the heaviness in him. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He hesitated. "Just business," he lied again. She smiled faintly, but her heart sank. Lies had a smell, faint, metallic, like rain before a storm. She had known it too many times before. The next morning, Ling called him again, her voice cheerful, too cheerful. "Dinner tonight?" she said. "We can discuss the investment proposal." James hesitated, then agreed. The restaurant was quiet, dimly lit. Ling talked about markets and numbers, but her eyes spoke of other things. "You've changed," she said softly. "You used to be closer." He smiled weakly. "People change." After dinner, he thanked her and left. But when he got home, the house felt colder. Deep was asleep on the couch, the scarf finished, folded neatly beside her. He picked it up gently. The stitches were uneven, the color dull, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Outside, a black car idled once more. The man inside raised his phone, taking one last picture, of the light spilling through the window, of James holding the scarf, his expression unreadable. He sent it to the same number. The reply came almost instantly. "Keep watching. Don't let her out of your sight." And somewhere far away, James's father closed his phone, the light from the screen fading across his face like a shadow that refused to leave. He didn't know yet what frightened him more, that his son had fallen in love with the wrong woman, or that this woman, somehow, might be the only one who could truly break him. The rain came before dawn, thin and cold, tapping softly against the windows of the farmhouse. Deep woke to the sound, the world outside swallowed by mist. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked toward the small garden that shimmered faintly beneath the rain. Everything looked distant, blurred, like a dream she couldn't touch. James was still asleep upstairs, his breathing steady. For a moment, she allowed herself to watch him, the rise and fall of his chest, the softness in his expression that he never showed when awake. She wondered if he dreamed of her, or if his mind drifted elsewhere, perhaps to that world of glass buildings and polished meetings that she could never belong to. When he woke, his first words were gentle. "You didn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "I like the rain," she said simply. He smiled, but something in his eyes had changed. It was subtle, but Deep felt it, a shadow that hadn't been there before. He seemed more distant now, his touch slower, his thoughts hidden behind that careful mask of calm. He left earlier than usual, claiming he had business in the city. She didn't question him, though the silence he left behind was heavier than any storm. James's drive into the city was quiet. The rain blurred the world beyond his windshield, turning everything into shades of gray. His father's words echoed in his head, "That woman is not who you think she is." He wanted to forget them, but they clung to him like smoke. When he reached the office, Ling was already waiting. She looked at him with concern that was too rehearsed, too perfect. "Rough morning?" she asked. "Just tired," he replied. She handed him a file. "I finished the draft for the investment. You should take a look." But even as he flipped through the pages, he felt her gaze on him, studying, searching. That afternoon, Ling received another message, a new photograph. It showed Diep walking through the market alone, her hair wet from the rain, her basket half empty. She looked fragile, almost ethereal, but there was strength in her posture, a quiet resilience. Ling stared at the image longer than she intended to. She didn't know why, but something about Diep unsettled her. Maybe it was envy, maybe it was guilt. She deleted the photo, but the unease lingered like a bruise. Back on the farm, the day stretched endlessly. Diep busied herself cleaning the kitchen, tending to the animals, and repairing the fence. Anything to fill the silence. But in the back of her mind, she kept returning to the man who had come asking about her past. Who had sent him? What did he want? She tried to dismiss it, but the memory wouldn't fade. That evening, as the light dimmed, she saw something glinting beyond the trees, a reflection, quick and sharp, like glass. She froze. It was gone in an instant, but the feeling of being watched returned, colder than before. When James came home that night, she didn't tell him. She didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, she cooked for him, warm soup, bread, and tea. He ate quietly, lost in thought. "James," she said softly, "are you unhappy with me?" He looked up, startled. "Why would you say that? You've been distant," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not you. It's just work." But the lie hung heavy in the air. She nodded, pretending to believe it, but her heart knew otherwise. The following morning, James's father called Ling to his office. The air in the room was sharp with authority. "You've worked closely with my son," he said. "Tell me what you know about that woman." Ling hesitated. "Diep. She's quiet, kind, but maybe too naive." The old man narrowed his eyes. "Naivety can be dangerous, especially when it hides intent." Ling didn't reply, but the words sank deep. Before she left, the old man handed her an envelope. "Deliver this to my son. Do not open it." That night, Ling drove to the countryside under a sky heavy with clouds. The road was slick with rain, the headlights cutting through the fog like blades. When she arrived, the farmhouse was dark except for a faint glow from the kitchen. Diep was inside, humming softly as she arranged jars of preserved fruit on the shelf. The scene was simple, almost painfully peaceful. Ling hesitated before knocking. Diep turned, surprised but smiling. "You came a long way. Come in, please." They sat together by the table, steam rising from their cups of tea. For a while, they spoke about nothing, the weather, the harvest, small things that meant little but filled the silence. Then Ling placed the envelope on the table. "This is for James," she said. "From his father." Diep looked at it, her curiosity flickering. "Should I give it to him?" Ling nodded. "Yes. But be careful, some truths hurt more than lies." There was something strange in Ling's tone, a warning, or perhaps pity. Later that night, when James returned, Diep handed him the envelope. "From your father," she said. He frowned, breaking the seal. Inside was a single photograph, one he had never seen before. It showed Diep, years younger, standing beside a man in a rural village. The man's arm gripped her shoulder possessively. Written on the back in neat handwriting were the words, "Do you still believe she is innocent?" James's world tilted. He stared at the photo, his chest tightening. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Diep's eyes widened. "I don't know." Ling brought it. "Who is this man?" I don't know," she stammered. "Maybe it was the family my uncle sold me to. I don't even remember his name." But her trembling voice only deepened his confusion. He turned away, anger and fear colliding inside him. "Why didn't you tell me?" She stepped closer. "Because I wanted to forget," she cried. "That life, it wasn't mine anymore." The silence that followed was unbearable. James finally left, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the empty house like thunder. Diep sank to the floor, tears streaking her face, the photograph still burning in her mind. She didn't know that outside, someone was watching through the rain-streaked window, camera in hand, recording everything. Hours later, Ling sat in her car at the edge of the property, watching the farmhouse lights flicker. She felt a sting of guilt, though she didn't know what she was guilty of, following orders, or crossing lines she shouldn't have. Her phone buzzed. A message from James's father appeared. "Well done. Now we'll see her true face." Ling stared at the words for a long time before deleting them. The next morning, James didn't come home. He spent the day in the city, meeting with investors, his mind miles away. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the photograph. He wanted to believe Deep, but the seed of doubt had already rooted itself deep. That night, when he finally returned, she was waiting by the gate, pale and red. "Please," she whispered, "you have to believe me." He looked at her, his voice low. "I want to. But everything around you is unclear. Because my life wasn't something beautiful," she said. "But it's mine. And you were the only part that made it feel real." Something in her words cracked the armor around him. He stepped closer, touching her cheek. "Then help me understand," he said. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll tell you everything." That night, Deep couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier than ever. She looked out the window and froze. A faint light moved among the trees, slow and deliberate. She stepped outside, barefoot, the earth cold beneath her feet. The light flickered again, then vanished. But just as she turned to go back inside, she heard it, a voice, faint but clear. "He doesn't know who you are." She spun around, heart pounding. The shadows offered no answer. Only the whisper of wind and the echo of her fear. She ran back inside, locking the door. The farmhouse creaked in protest, as if alive, as if warning her that safety was an illusion. Upstairs, James stirred but didn't wake. The scarf she had made for him hung over the chair, forgotten but waiting, a silent witness to a love now poisoned by suspicion. Outside, the watcher lifted his phone one last time, capturing the image of Deep's trembling hands closing the curtains. The picture was sent, the message brief, "She knows." Far away, in the cold silence of his study, James's father opened the message and stared at it for a long while. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Let's see how far she'll go to protect him." The night refused to end. Clouds gathered over the hills like bruises, and the moon hid behind them, as if unwilling to witness what was coming. Deep sat by the fire, her hands trembling over the faint flames. She had promised to tell James everything, but now that the time had come, she didn't know where to begin. How could she put years of pain into words that wouldn't destroy the small piece they had built? Every secret she carried had teeth, and each truth was a wound waiting to open. When James came downstairs, the dawnlight touched his face, pale and tired. He had barely slept. "You said you would tell me," he murmured. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. Deep nodded slowly. "You deserve to know," she said, her voice cracking. "But what you hear might make you hate me." "Tell me anyway," he replied. She began to speak, softly at first, then with growing strength, as if the truth itself demanded to be freed. She told him about the uncle who sold her, about the men who treated her like property, about the nights she prayed to die and the mornings she cursed herself for still breathing. She spoke of the man in the photograph, the one who had claimed her, not out of love, but cruelty. "He owned me," she said, her voice trembling. "Until the day James came." She paused, realizing what she had said, and then looked at him. "Until the day you came." James stood frozen. He remembered the woman he had found years ago, broken, silent, covered in bruises she refused to explain. He had saved her, yes, but he had never truly understood what he was saving her from. Now he did. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, tears in her eyes. "Your father will never forgive me," she whispered. "He'll never believe that what we have is real." "I don't care what he believes," James said. "I care about you." But even as he spoke, the sound of an approaching car broke through the morning quiet. Tires unravel. A door slamming. Deep's breath caught in her throat. James turned toward the window, and his expression hardened. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the door. Outside, his father stood beneath the gray sky, a coat draped over his shoulders, flanked by two men in suits. The old man's eyes were sharp as glass. "So it's true," he said coldly. "You brought her into my family's land, into our life." "You had no right to spy on me," James snapped. "You've lost your judgment," the old man retorted. "Do you even know who she is?" "I know enough," James said, his voice rising. "More than whatever you think your reports told you." The old man's lips thinned. He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and handed him a folder. Then let's stop pretending. Do you want to know who she really is? Here. He opened the folder and threw it at James's feet. Photos spilled across the wet ground. Deep, years younger, in the company of men with weapons, documents written in a foreign language, reports from border towns. She wasn't just sold, his father said. She was involved in trafficking. She helped them. She's not innocent. James's breath hitched. That's a lie. Is it? The old man sneered. Do you think she told you everything? Behind them, the door creaked open. Deep stood in the doorway, pale as the morning mist. Stop, she said quietly. Her voice cut through the air, trembling but clear. Your reports are right, she continued. But you don't know the whole story. She stepped closer, rain dampening her hair. I was forced to help them. I didn't have a choice. They made me lure other girls, threatened to kill me if I refused. When James found me, I was running, not from guilt, but from them. The old man's face hardened, but something flickered in his eyes, doubt, maybe even pity. You expect me to believe that? He asked. No, Deep said softly. I don't expect anything. I just needed him to know. She turned to James, tears mixing with the rain. You gave me back my life. But now, being near you only destroys yours. James stepped forward, his voice raw. You think I care about any of that? You think I could let you go now? She shook her head. If you love me, you have to. Her words cut him deeper than any truth could. The old man gestured to his guards. Enough. Take her away. One of the men moved toward her, but James stepped between them. Touch her, and you will regret it, he said. His tone was calm, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. The men hesitated. The old man's voice sharpened. You're risking everything for a woman who will drag you down. Then let me fall, James said. At least I'll fall for something real. The standoff held for what felt like forever. Then, without a word, the old man turned away, signaling his men to leave. You'll regret this, he muttered, before stepping into the car. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving only silence and the echo of rain. James turned to Deep, his chest heaving. It's over, he whispered. He can't hurt you now. But Deep shook her head. You don't understand, she said. The men he hired, they weren't just investigators. One of them used to work for the people who own me. They'll come back. That night, the storm returned, violent and unrelenting. James stayed close to her, the sound of thunder masking their fears. We'll leave, he said. We'll go somewhere far. Start again. Deep looked at him, her eyes full of love and dread. You don't have to throw everything away for me. You're not something I threw away, he said firmly. You're the reason I still believe there's something worth keeping. But fate was never kind to those who dared to dream against it. Just before dawn, the sound of breaking glass jolted them awake. Men in dark clothes burst through the door, faces hidden, voices sharp. James fought back, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy iron bar, and swinging with desperate force. One man fell, another lunged forward. Deep screamed his name, but he didn't stop. Then, suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the air. Silence. James staggered, his hand clutching his side, blood seeping through his shirt. Deep caught him as he fell, her cries muffled by the storm outside. The intruders fled, leaving chaos and broken wood behind. She pressed her hands against the wound, trembling. Stay with me, she begged. His lips curled into a faint smile. You always tell me to stay. His voice was barely a whisper. So I will. She dragged him to the couch.